Welcome to the inaugural episode of Witty CFB. This is your host, Rob Sheply, and for our inaugural episode, we're going to be discussing the expectations of the 2024 Florida Gators. And for those of you who don't know me very well, Florida Gators have been a team I've been following for at least the past, 6-7 years now, especially, since I went to school down in Florida. I just kind of naturally became a fan and been following the team extensively. And when I think about the Florida Gators, I go back and I think to myself, man, this is probably the first time I've really been excited to see this team in the past decade. Of course, there haven't really had too much conference championship success since Jim McElwain back in 2015. But as I look at the schedule and I think about the expectations, there's a lot that I ask myself, but primarily the question that keeps coming back to mind is Florida heading in the right direction? And as we kind of think about last season and we think about what's coming up ahead, there's a couple notes that I think are important to elaborate on, and hopefully it will kind of all put together in terms of what the expectations should be and what exactly they need to do in order to get the team moving in the right direction. So first things first, just a quick recap of 2023. Obviously, one of the biggest disappointments for me was definitely the beginning of the season when they played number 14 Utah. Obviously, going into it, that first drive was just hard to watch. Utah just had their number the entire game, and quite frankly, Florida couldn't put up points at all. And especially if you're watching that game, it was definitely a little nerve-wracking watching that. And, you're kind of asking yourself, hey, is this ultimately what we're going to be seeing moving forward? And it didn't quite work out that way, but as the season kind of progressed, you saw a couple weeks later that they beat Tennessee at home, and then they lost to Kentucky. They had a decent win against Vanderbilt. They beat South Carolina in a shootout, lose to Georgia, lose to Arkansas, lose to LSU, lose to Missouri, and then lose to Florida State. So obviously, it's never pretty losing your last five, and I think Billy's aware of that. And quite frankly, they have made some adjustments in terms of the one thing I think will be a difference maker is how much funding has gone towards the program. Obviously, it's not as high as your Georgias, your Tennessees, or anything like that. But generally speaking, it definitely makes them a little bit more competitive. And that should make them a little bit more relevant too, especially when you consider all the other teams that they've added. Obviously, it's our first legitimate year with Texas and Oklahoma and, all those teams too. And, South Carolina's only getting better, Kentucky's only getting better, Tennessee's only getting better. So ultimately, it's only really going to get more difficult for them moving forward. And when we look at Florida, the big question really comes to mind is, is this something that we can move forward with, or do we just need to completely tear everything up? And obviously, for Florida fans out there, Scott Strickland, he's definitely a polarizing figure. I mean, let's face it. You either love him or you hate him. He's just that type of guy. And in many ways, the thing about Billy is that the one thing that stood out to me in that press conference back in 2021 was the fact that, Billy's going to do it Billy's way. Whether you like it or not, Billy's going to be Billy. And we've seen that pretty consistently, especially, for Florida fans out there. If, you go back to 2020, that final season when he was at Louisiana, you could see a lot of similarities between how Billy's offense looks at Louisiana versus how it looks at Florida. And one of the big staggering things that kind of come to mind were in particular a lot of the offensive sort of patterns, a lot of the hitch routes, the stream routes, anything like that. It's definitely more of a pro style West Coast sort of short passing sort of game. And I think the one thing that Florida is really going to have to do differently is they're going to have to take more chances down the field. Obviously you lose Ricky Parcell. He just got drafted in the first round. I believe to San Francisco. Don't quote me on that, but I believe he got drafted in the first round. And then obviously they have some decent playmakers and all of that, but the one thing that seems obvious to me is that they're going to have to rely on the running game more. I'm not not suggesting that they can't pass the ball, because Graham Mertz had an excellent year last year. I'm telling you, compared to the guy that we saw at Wisconsin for the past 4 seasons, the guy's a stud. I mean, let's face it, 20 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, approximately 2,900 yards. I mean, the guy knows what he's doing. And the one thing that just surprised me, he just looked comfortable out there. That's the one thing. He just looked like he just got some things going. He looked like he was just relaxed. And the one thing that we didn't see at Wisconsin enough is he just simply was just making too many erratic decisions. And ultimately, what's gonna we're gonna see Graham kind of go in the right direction is I think he's gonna have to take more chances. I mean, there's no way around that, especially when we look at this 2024 season. Obviously you're starting up in Miami, and that's a hot game right there. Fortunately they're home, and in many ways I see a lot of similarities between Billy and Florida and Mario Cristobal in Miami. There's a lot of similarities in terms of when people talk about those two programs, instantly what comes to mind is back in the early 2000s when they were just dominating and kicking ass, and the defenses, that's what comes to mind. So when I think about those programs, those are the two things that come to mind. And they're both going to come out hot. I mean, obviously I think Florida, can they pull it out? Yeah, but am I saying absolutely they're going to? I'm a little skeptical to completely go with that, but for the time being, I think they can pull off that win. So let's just say they start off 1-0. Then you go to FCS Sanford, by the way, who's a pretty solid program, but that should be a win. And then another intriguing matchup, you have Week 3, Texas A&M, who we've heard the stories about Jimbo, so I'm not going to go into that. But I mean, Mike Elko, dude, I'm telling you, a lot of people kind of shit on that sort of hire because hey, he was there before. Why would you pay